All right, so we're diving deep again today.
Great.
This time, we're headed to Bodh Gaya in India.
Okay.
It's home to the Mahabodhi Temple. You know, it's one of the holiest sites in Buddhism.
Right.
Where Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha. You'd think a place that sacred would be all peace and quiet, you know?
Yeah, you'd think.
Turns out, not really.
Nope. There's a pretty big controversy going on right there at the temple. And to try to figure it all out, we're looking at a couple of YouTube videos, one from the Lolland and another from Decad TV.
Okay.
The Lolland video is kind of like a news report, lays it all out.
Okay.
Then the Decad TV one is more of like a personal interview.
Okay.
With one of the monks that's involved.
Gotcha. So, and this isn't just a little argument, right? This has been going on for a while.
No, this has been simmering for decades, like centuries even.
Centuries. Wow.
Yeah, it all comes down to who gets to, manage this incredibly important site.
Right, because it's so important.
Yeah, so the Buddhist monks, they're protesting right now. They're even on a hunger strike.
Wow.
And they're demanding that the way the Mahabodhi Temple is managed gets changed, like completely changed.
Okay, so how is it managed now?
So there's this thing called the Bodh Gaya Temple Act. It was passed in 1949. They call it the BT Act for short.
Okay.
And it created this committee, the Bodh Gaya Temple Management Committee.
Okay.
Or BTMC.
BTMC, okay.
And the BTMC, they run the temple.
So that sounds pretty straightforward. What's the controversy then?
Well, here's the thing. The BT Act says that the committee, the BTMC, has to have equal representation from Buddhists and Hindus.
Oh, okay.
Which includes the Mahant. That's like the chief priest.
So equal representation at Buddhism's most important site. That's got to be a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, you can imagine. A lot of Buddhists feel it's super unfair, And the Decad TV interview, it really shows you how strongly they feel about it.
Right, because it's a personal interview.
Yeah. The monk in the video, he even asks, would a mosque be managed by people who aren't Muslim?
Right.
Or a Hindu temple by people who aren't Hindu? It just doesn't make sense to them.
Yeah, I see their point.
And, you said it earlier, this goes back further than 1949, way further.
Yeah, I said centuries.
Yeah, you have to go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s to really get it.
Okay.
So back then, there was this guy named Anagarika Dharmapala. He was a huge figure in the Buddhist revival movement.
Okay.
And he fought really hard for Buddhists to have control over the Mahabodhi Temple.
So even back then, it was an issue.
Big time. And at that time, the temple was actually controlled by a Hindu math. It's like a monastery.
Wow. So it's almost like this long history of the temple being run by another religion is at the heart of what's happening now.
You got it. And even before Dharmapala was fighting for it, in 1922, a group of monks went to a meeting of the Indian National Congress.
Okay.
And they brought it up with Gandhi himself. Yeah, some people even say that Gandhi promised to give the temple to Buddhists once India got its independence.
Oh, wow. That just adds another layer to it all.
Totally. And then in 1992, things kind of boiled over.
1992, okay.
Huge protest movement pops up, everyone demanding Buddhist control again.
So they've been trying for a long time.
Oh, yeah. And the Lolland video talks about this thing called the Dhamma Mukti Yatra.
What's that?
It was this, a symbolic chariot procession. They started in Mumbai and went all the way to the Mahabodhi Temple. They called it a liberation.
Wow, that's commitment.
Yeah, but get this. The government back then, they didn't give Buddhists full control. Instead, they kind of brought some of the protest leaders into the BTMC itself.
Oh, interesting. So instead of giving them what they wanted, they just kind of absorbed them into the system?
Yeah, pretty much.
Do you think that's part of why we're seeing this protest now? It didn't really solve anything back then.
It's definitely playing a role. The Lolland video actually points out that some of those guys from the 1992 protests, they're on the BTMC now.
Oh, wow.
And the protesters today, they're saying those guys sold out.
Oh, so it's like divisions within the Buddhists themselves now.
Yeah. And there are even some saying that this big Buddhist group, the All India Bhikkhu Mahasangh, they're not supporting the protests because they're connected to this Hindu nationalist group called the RSS.
Oh, wow. This is complicated.
Yeah, and on top of all that, local journalists are saying the number of protesters is going down.
Really? So what happens now? What's next?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
The Lolland video, they talk about how the government's handling it so far.
Okay.
The district magistrate, he's downplaying the whole thing.
Okay.
And the protesters are saying that, they've written letters to the chief minister, but he hasn't responded.
Right.
But the government's saying they want to talk, but the monks won't end their hunger strike until they get what they want. So it's a standoff. And what about the Decad TV video? What did that monk say about where it goes from here?
He didn't really talk about that. He was more focused on the history of it all.
Okay.
And why, Buddhists should have control. He was very, very passionate about it.
Well, it sounds like we need to understand that historical argument better, like really dig into it to see where it goes.
Yeah, that's a good idea. His arguments are really at the heart of what's happening today. That interview on Decad TV, it's really something. The monk, he's just so certain about everything.
Yeah.
He lays out this whole history of the Mahabodhi Temple, and it's really interesting.
It is. And he doesn't just focus on the 1949 Act, right?
Yeah.
He goes way back. He even talks about how the Act itself, it mentions this Saivite sect.
Right.
And he's saying that that's a way to connect the temple to this, specific Hindu sect that supposedly controlled it in the past. But he doesn't buy it, does he? No, not at all. And this is where it gets really interesting. He brings up these famous Chinese Buddhist pilgrims, Faxian, Xuanzang, and Aitzing.
Okay.
They traveled to India centuries ago, and they wrote about the Mahabodhi Temple, And in their writings, it's clearly a Buddhist site.
Right.
Way before this supposed Hindu control he's talking about. So it directly contradicts the story in the 1949 Act.
So he's using these historical figures to show that maybe the Act isn't telling the whole story.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, hey, look, the history is more complicated than you're making it out to be.
Yeah, he's pushing back against that narrative.
Yeah.
And he doesn't stop there, right? He goes on to say that the whole 1949 Act, it was written with a Hindu mindset, and he even compares it to the Ramandir movement.
Yeah, that's a big deal. The Ramandir movement, that was a huge thing. It led to, Hindus getting control of this disputed site.
Right.
And he's saying that Buddhists are in the same fight now. They want that same recognition, that same control over their own holy place.
Right. So it's not just about managing a temple. It's about something much bigger. It's about, religious freedom.
Totally. And he knows people might say that the protest is political.
Which happens a lot, right?
Yes. But he says in the interview, anyone who tries to, use this movement for politics is going to be destroyed. Strong words.
Yeah. So he's making it clear that this is a religious fight, not a political one. But he doesn't reject politics entirely, does he?
No. He actually calls on political parties to help out, with resources and stuff. And he wants supporters all over the world to use social media. Specific hashtags like I support Mahabodhi Vihar and Brahmin Free Mahabodhi Vihar.
So he's using all the tools he's got. Protests, politics, and social media. It's kind of amazing.
It shows how, they're using everything they can to get their message out there. It's like those pilgrims from way back, but instead of traveling for years, they're using tweets and hashtags.
It is a pretty stark contrast, isn't it? Ancient traditions and modern technology all mixed up together.
Totally. And his vision for the future. He wants that 1949 Act gone, completely gone. He wants a brand new act, one that gives Buddhists complete control.
But wouldn't that just shift the power, from one group to another? Wouldn't that just make someone else feel left out?
Yeah, that's the question. Is that really the answer? Or is it just going to cause more problems down the road?
Yeah, it's complicated. You have all these different religions in India. They all have their own holy places. It's hard to know how to manage that fairly.
Absolutely. And that's what this whole deep dive is about, right? It's not just about the history or the law. It's about figuring out how to share these places that mean so much to so many people.
Exactly. So we've got this historical argument from the monk. We've got the government kind of downplaying things. What about the protesters themselves? What exactly do they want?
Well, they want that BT Act gone, that's clear. But what comes next? What does their version of, Buddhist control actually look like? Neither of these videos really tell us.
So it's kind of a mystery. We know what they're against, but not what they're for.
Right. It could be that they're doing that on purpose,
Oh, interesting.
Just focus on the problems now and worry about the details later.
Yeah. It's like they're saying, fix this first, then we'll talk about the rest.
Exactly. But it leaves some big questions unanswered, like how would they make sure other religious groups, especially Hindus, still have a voice? Would it be fair? Would it be inclusive?
Right, because Hindus have a long history at the Mahabodhi Temple too, right?
Exactly. And it all goes back to that question we were talking about before. What does this mean for different religions getting along in India? If this protest works, will other groups start demanding the same thing? Will it just make things worse?
It's hard to say. And with the protests getting smaller, it makes you wonder if this is just a temporary thing or if it's a sign of a much bigger problem.
And if the government keeps ignoring it, could that make it even worse? Could it blow up into something even bigger later on?
It's definitely a situation to watch.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the history, the protests, the government's response. But what does it all mean for us, the people listening? What can we take away from all of this? It's like we've just started to understand what's going on here. You know, it's not just about religion. It's about history and politics and like what it means to belong somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. And what makes it so interesting but also so frustrating is that there's not really a bad guy here, you know?
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in the laws and the politics, but it really comes down to people feeling connected to this place, this temple. It means so much to them.
And those feelings, those connections, they're not always easy to explain, right?
No, they're not. And I think that's what that monk in the Dakar TV video was trying to say. He's talking about a shared history, a shared identity that goes beyond the rules and regulations.
I get that. But we still need to figure out how to actually manage the Mahabodhi Temple, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a World Heritage Site. People come from all over to see it. It needs to be run properly.
Right. And that's where it gets tricky. The protesters want that 1949 act gone, but what comes next? Neither of those videos really explain what they do instead.
So we don't really know what their plan is. We know what they don't want, but not what they do want.
Exactly. And like we said before, that might be on purpose.
Right.
Focus on the problems first. The solutions can come later.
Yeah, makes sense. But it leaves some big questions. Like, would Buddhists be open to sharing, you know? Would they include other religions?
Yeah, how would they balance their need for control with the fact that this place is important to so many different people?
Tough questions.
Yeah.
Questions that they'll need to answer if they want people to support them, I think.
For sure. And what about the government? What are they going to do? The Lal and Top video said they were downplaying it all, but will they keep doing that if things get bigger?
Yeah, it's a tough spot for them. If they ignore it, it could get worse, right? But if they give in, who knows what that'll mean for other religious sites in India.
Exactly. It could cause all sorts of problems. And that brings us back to that big question, doesn't it? Can different religions really share a sacred space fairly? Can everyone feel like they belong, like they're respected?
That's the million-dollar question, and I don't think there's an easy answer.
No, definitely not. But these deep dives, that's what I like about them. They make you think about these things, even if there's no clear solution.
Yeah, they make you realize that things are complicated, that there's always more to the story.
Absolutely. And maybe, just maybe, this whole Mahabodhi Temple thing, it can be a way to start a bigger conversation.
Okay.
Not just in India, but everywhere.
Yeah.
About how we share these special places, these sacred spaces, you know?
It's a conversation we need to have. So as we wrap this up, I'm feeling a bit worried, but also hopeful. Worried that things might get worse, you know?
Yeah.
But hopeful because at the end of the day, this is about people trying to find their place, trying to be understood.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something we can all relate to, you know? Maybe that can help us find